Right, okay, I think we're live. I think we're now live. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Monday morning show. This is Elevenses with Kevin Williams, and hopefully we're up and running. I'm still getting used to the technology, as you have probably figured out by now. The problem is that I can see that it now says live in the top corner, but it doesn't seem to trigger automatically according to the timer, which is what I was expecting it to do. Okay, so anyway, on with the show. What we're doing today is we're bringing you some stories. What have we got? We've got the police and the military have been out stopping riders. We have reports of bikes being stolen and vandalised, and I'll give you some thoughts on what you can do about that. I'll be giving you the first tip about better biking, and what I'll be talking about is actually understanding how the suspension works, and hopefully, I don't believe it, it's logged me out. Right, was anything coming through? Yeah, bloody Facebook just logged me out. Yeah, I've just been logged out. Right, okay, am I back? I was just trying to tell everybody about the show and how it was going, and Facebook logged me out, which didn't help. Right, so what's on today's show? We've got 4 stories that I want to give you. First of all, let's just start again. Police and military have been out stopping drivers and riders over the weekend, so we'll have a quick talk about that. Now, the reports of bikes being stolen and vandalised, I've seen several over the last few days, so we'll have a quick talk about what you can do to protect your bike while it's laid up. Something to think about. I said I would bring you some better riding tips, and the first one of those is about the suspension and how that works. And I also send you a link to what looks like a worthy cause about how you can support the NHS at this time by helping them with meals. Right, okay, now let's look at the first item on the list. The clocks obviously went forward at Saturday night, and so we've got the longer daylight hours in the evening, and well, the police were fully aware that that would tend to encourage people to get out on the roads. So assisted by the military, they've been cracking down on non-essential travel, and they've been telling people basically the countryside isn't open to visitors, which is the message that we've all been getting from the NHS experts. So who have they been stopping? Well, there have been reports of bored kids out in borrowed cars, out for a joyride. They've been pulled over, and various offences. They've been charged with those. But they've also found people doing things like taking their kids for driving lessons. That was somebody stopped in North Wales. His explanation was because the roads are quiet. The driving lessons, as they said, aren't an essential part of the taking exercise. There have been numerous reports of campers and caravans off to scenic spots and being turned round from places as far afield as the Lake District and Cornwall and being sent back to where they came from. I follow a few forums having a camper myself, and there's still an awful lot of people who say, well, I'm self-contained in my camper, why can't I go out? Well, the rules are that you stay at home, and a camper isn't a home. Unfortunately, there have also been some reports of motorcyclists being stopped going out for rides as well. At a checkpoint manned by the police and the Royal Military Police in North Yorkshire, so somewhere near Richmond, for example, an inspector of the police, Mark G, was quoted saying, we've had motorcyclists coming into the Dales claiming they're exercising, and we have to remind people exercise should be done from your home address on foot unless you're on a bicycle. And he goes on to point out that every time that you're on the road, there's an increased chance of a collision, and if that happens, it's putting strain on the local NHS resources, which are limited in any case, even without facing a worldwide crisis. So, okay, is that exaggerating? Well, unfortunately, I have received 2 updates through my newsfeed of fatal crashes over the last couple of days. Now, okay, maybe that's not quite as many as we would normally be expecting as the sun comes out and people start getting out on the roads, but we have 350 approximately motorcycle fatalities every year. If we're getting 2 or 3 a week, work at the sums out for yourself. We're not actually that far off. We're at 50% or so of the total. So do stay at home if you don't absolutely need to be out on your bike, and if you are out on your bike, do take care. Okay, having said that, there is a positive note to it. Inspector G said he thought the message was getting through, and there were fewer riders and drivers out on the roads than in previous days this week. And other forces have also said that riders have got the message. Cumbria Police, for example, put out a tweet over the weekend praising motorcyclists who didn't go to Devil's Bridge at Kirkby Lonsdale. That was one of the places that a lot of riders congregated last weekend to take advantage of the sunshine. So, yeah, okay, so well done to all those riders who have stayed at home. Right, okay, just a reminder, you're watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams. You can tune in for 30 minutes of live topical news, controversial views and better riding tips every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Saturday at 11 a.m. Okay, so what's the next story? Well, it was one which is actually very distressing, very concerning. There have been a number of reports coming through my news feed of bikes being set alight. The latest was actually in Birmingham on Friday evening. This smacks of petty vandalism, doesn't it? This doesn't sound like organised crime gangs stealing bikes to order, which is kind of what we're used to. This is bored kids probably roaming the streets with nothing better to do than torch somebody's pride and joy. So what can you do about it? Well, here are some ideas I wrote down a few minutes ago, some thoughts. Conceal and lock. That's the best answer that I can come up with. Let's be honest about this. Most of us aren't going riding anytime soon. Obviously, if you're still using the bike to get to and from an essential job, then some of this advice still applies, but possibly you can't go quite as far as those of us who've got bikes parked up for the duration. So have a think about how you can actually look after your motorcycle. I've just got to get the clock up on screen so I don't overrun. So if you can put it out of sight, that's by far and away the best method. If the bike's out of sight, somebody doesn't know it's there, it won't be a target. So if you've got a garage, put the bike in the garage, make some space if you have to, but throw some stuff out from the back, get it in somehow or other. If you haven't got a garage, then see what else you can do. You may be able to manhandle the bike down a side passage through a gate round the path to the back garden. You may be able to bring it round the rear access and put it in the garden that way. If you can, get it in the shed at the back. If you've got a small bike, scooter, 125 or something like that, it may be entirely possible to manhandle it actually through the house itself. You may have to clear that one with the your other half. But you know, if you point out the fact that the bike is vulnerable while it's parked somewhere invisible out in the front drive or in the front garden or something like that, if you can get it out of sight round the back. Scooters in particular, obviously 125 is very light, very easy to sort of just roll away. So if you can get it out of the garden, out of the front access, get it out there if you possibly can. You may have to do a little bit of work with spanners. It may involve taking the mirrors off. You may have to loosen the bars just to make it a little bit narrower. You may have to even take foot pegs off, but if you can do that, a couple of people can easily move a 125. You probably even do it on your own. I've certainly had to haul much bigger bikes around into confined areas when I've been a biking instructor, for example. But if you can, get it out of sight. If you can't get it round the back, hide it as best you can. Put it behind a hedge if you've got one, tie it up against the back of a hedge. It's less obvious. Behind the car, park the car up next to it if you can, wedge it in the corner with the car. If you've got wheelie bins, maybe you can hide it behind wheelie bins. Again, put it under a cover, get it out of sight of casual observation. That's the best advice yet. And then think about how you're going to lock it up. If you have security already, then use it. An awful lot of bikes I see often have no security at all, and then somebody says, oh, I can't be bothered to put the chain on, it takes too long. Well, get it out of the garage, get it out of the shed, from wherever it is, and put it actually on the bike. If the lock's seized up, get a bit of oil on it. You must have an old bicycle chain somewhere. Anything that will slow somebody down or deter a casual thief from just wheeling your bike out into the street has to be a good thing. So if you can, secure it to something solid. Don't use what I saw one guy do, which is put it around a plastic drain pipe. People just pull the drain pipe off the wall. But if you've got something solid that you can attach it to, try. If there are two bikes parked up, chain the bikes to each other. It makes it doubly, or more than doubly, difficult to move. If you can't chain it to anything, don't leave a chain and a lock dangling on the floor, because the minute you do that, you make it a lot easier for someone to smash the lock. A lot of motorcycle security chains aren't actually very good quality, so the more you can protect the chain and lock from casual attack, the better. As I say, we're not talking about stopping professional thieves here. We're talking about the young sort of hoodlums who are just wheeling these bikes away around the corners and torching them. Okay, so another thing you can do, if you haven't got an alarm on the bike, think about taking the battery out. You'll have to think twice if you do have an alarm, but if there's no battery, at least nobody can hotwire it and start it nearly so easily. They'll still wheel it away, but they can't ride it away. Finally, it really is impossible to stop someone who really, really wants your bike taking it away. But most of us haven't got the top-end models that tend to attract the really sophisticated thieves. Most of the bikes that disappear are fairly sort of run-of-the-mill bikes, particularly the lightweights. So, do something and try to stop this petty vandalism. It's just something you can do to help yourself a little. Right, okay, now just a reminder, you're watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams. You can tune in every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday at 11 a.m. and catch me here for 30 minutes of live topical news, controversial views and riding tips. So, yes, better biking tips. I was going to talk about the suspension, wasn't I? Now, I have a prop which I've forgotten to put out ready, so I'll just go and fetch it. Right, here we are. Here's my little prop. Wipe the dust off. So, what are we looking at? We're looking at an old Style R1, one of the original ones, a little model here, which I've used quite a lot over the years for trying to explain various parts of motorcycle dynamics. It's amazing what you can do with a little model. Motorcycles have increasingly developed more sophisticated suspension. However, the important point is that however sophisticated the suspension actually is on this bike, it doesn't work any differently from the most basic 125. There are a few bikes with funny front ends around, leading link forks and things like that, but we'll ignore those and we'll talk about bikes with conventional forks, whether they're right way up or upside down, and conventional shocks at the rear, whether it's a single shock with rising rate, a single straight push, more shock without the sophisticated rising rate equipment, or whether it is in fact the an old twin shock style. There's plenty of those around. How does the suspension work? Well, fairly obviously, under compression, the rear end on this one goes up and down. Okay, the front end is fixed, it's not that sophisticated a toy. But the forks under braking would normally compress, the wheel would move upwards on the fork, and at the back end the rear shock compresses and the rear wheel moves up and down. That's all fairly obvious, we should know that. So how does that affect what we do out on the bike when we're riding it? Well, one of the important things to understand is how the bike steers over bumps, and how it negotiates bumps. Basically, if we're riding the bike on a bumpy road, then as we go over the bumps, the suspension moves at both ends and compresses as we hit the bump, and then as we go over the bump it drops down again. So what we experience is a more level road ride on that bumpy road. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about if you ride a bicycle with no suspension and you ride it on off-road on a bumpy surface. My old mountain bike is a fairly basic no suspension model, and compared with a modern, more up-to-date bike with suspension at both ends, it's a bit of a jarring ride. So that's why we have suspension on motorcycles. We're travelling a lot faster, that's the main reason. So the intent of the suspension is to absorb bumps. Now the problem is that we compromise all this when we're going around corners. Now when we're leant over, the suspension doesn't work as well. It may not be entirely obvious, but until you put the bike over on its side and you replicate the force of a bump, instead of the bump, the pressure, the force on the wheel being directly in line with the action of the rear shock, making that wheel go up and down, lean the bike over, the force is still up and down, but now what it's doing is it's actually trying to push the bike over on its side. So the more we lean the motorcycle from the vertical, the more that bike shifts from upright to leant over, the more of that force actually just tries to lift the entire bike rather than compress the rear suspension. And of course exactly the same applies at the front. So okay, bumpy roads, suspension doesn't work nearly as well as it does upright, as it does in when we're cornering. So think about that. That's the first thing to consider. The more we lean on a bumpy road, the less effective the suspension is at absorbing bumps, and the more that we're going to kick the bike offline. Okay, but there's other factors, aren't there? Because we also change speed. Now, as soon as we change speed, what happens is we tend to load up the front suspension on the brakes. So as we brake, the centre of mass moves forward slightly, but the front suspension will compress under that braking. If we accelerate, the opposite tends to happen. The centre of mass tends to move a bit backwards, and again I can show you the suspension will compress under acceleration. So on the brakes and on the throttle, what we end up doing is making the bike do a bit of a seesawing motion. Now, if we are braking in a straight line, we have all that suspension movement available to take up the braking force. There is a problem here, of course, though. You'll notice that as soon as we compress that suspension, those bumps that we're hitting have nowhere much to go. So we have to think in terms of how hard we can brake. On a smooth surface, we can brake very hard indeed without losing traction. On a bumpy surface, if we brake very hard, we use up nearly all the suspension travel, and then the bumps are simply kicking the bike up and down. So that makes for a very uncomfortable ride. Worst case scenario, it can do something else. It can actually mean that the front tyre starts to lose grip, because if you think about it, the tyre is an inflated balloon. It might be a ring-shaped one, but it is a balloon. So what happens is that the tyre starts to have to do more and more work absorbing the bump. The harder we hit the bump, because the suspension stopped working because we're hard on the brakes, the more the tyre itself takes up the flex, and that'll work for a little bit, but sooner or later we actually run out of flex in the front tyre, and then the front tyre starts to lose grip. Now, if you've ever tried to brake hard over what are sometimes called stutter bumps, those are the kind of bumps that make the front of the bike go up and down in a sort of very rapid fashion. You often find it on a rippled surface where lots of heavy lorries have actually braked approaching a corner, particularly where the road surface has been hot and started to melt. The ripples form those little stutter bumps, and if the frequency is all wrong, the rate of compression of the tyre and the movement of what's left of the suspension travel, if that all gets wrong and lines up neatly with the frequency of the bumps themselves, you can actually start bouncing the front end of the bike off the ground, and then the front wheel will lock up. Yeah, it's not of common, but it does happen. Okay, now think about this. If we brake in a straight line, that suspension travel is all available to deal with the bumps. Hopefully, if we don't hit really hard bumps and we're not braking too hard, the forks and the tyre between them will absorb the bump and the tyre will maintain grip. But what happens if we do lose grip? If the front locks? Well, the thing is that a motorcycle with a locked front tyre simply goes in a straight line. It's got all that momentum, all that mass pushing it forward. It will go in a straight line long enough for us to recover control. Now, what happens when we're going round the corner? Well, now we have a bit of a different problem. If we hit those bumps mid-corner, then remember, we're losing the effectiveness of the suspension to absorb the bump as more lean angle we get, and we're relying more and more on the tyre. If the tyre now starts to lose grip, the bike will go in a straight line when we actually want it to go in a corner. And this is why a lot of people actually fall off on a bend on the brakes. It's not because they particularly over braked, but because the front tyre just lost grip. The suspension could no longer cope with the bumps under it. The tyre's flexibility couldn't cope with the bump. Tyre bounces, the brakes come on, they lock the front wheel, and the bike goes off at an angle. Okay, ABS, I hear you say. ABS will sort that out. Well, if you've got standard ABS, it's likely to help a bit. If you've got cornering ABS, with a bit of luck, it will keep you on track. But what tends to happen as soon as we feel anything like ABS kick in, it usually comes as a bit of a scare, and people release the brakes. And then where do they go? Well, not round the bend. They suddenly are going too fast for the corner, and they tend to run off the road. So whilst ABS can sort out the technical problem, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll sort out the human factor involved. We tend to panic mid-corner, and if the front wheel starts to lock and the ABS triggers, the first instinct that most riders have is actually let the brakes go, which is the wrong one if you've got cornering ABS. So, okay, how do we avoid this? Well, basically, we get the technique right. We do all our braking upright in a straight line, and then we get on the power before we start to steer. Okay, now this is something I'm going to be covering in my e-course over the next few weeks. So if you want to find out a little bit more about this, come and have a look at my e-course. I will be talking about traction in corners. And what I'll be doing on Wednesday is I'll be talking about the second half of this tip, which is about why we don't accelerate on the road mid-corner, why we actually leave hard acceleration till the bike is back upright again. Okay, so the conventional wisdom about accelerating through the midpoint of the corner, I will tell you why that's actually not a great idea on a road bike on an ordinary road. Right, so I can put my little model away for the moment. We're coming rapidly to the end of the 30 minutes I've allotted myself for today's show. Again, just a little reminder, you're watching Elevenses here with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills, and I'll be bringing you 30 minutes of topical news, controversial views and riding tips, just like the one I've just brought you, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday at 11. Okay, so final piece, I said I would give you an update on what the NHS situation is. Well, it seems that a problem that's arisen is that obviously on the front line the staff are working absolutely flat out at the moment, 18-hour shifts for many of them, and of course the hospitals are working around the clock, and that means all the staff, doctors, nurses, other support staff, are in need of food while they're on the job. And guess what? It seems that the canteens are closing at regular hours. Now, how that can happen in this situation is anybody's guess, but that is what I'm hearing. If anybody has better information and can correct me on that, obviously we'll put a correction out next week. But there's a website being set up to collect money to provide meals, hot meals for NHS staff on the job. It seems at the moment the hospitals being supported are in the London area, in the sort of home counties. But if you're interested, take a look at, I'll give you the URL now. It's mealsforthenhs.com. Mealsforthenhs.com. No spaces, no hyphens, no dashes, just mealsforthenhs.com. And explains the purpose of the site, and maybe have a look at it and maybe think about putting some money their way if you're feeling that way inclined. Good cause, I think. Right, so we're just running up to 11:30, looking at my little on-screen clock on the computer. That's it for today. You've been watching Elevenses with Kevin Williams, Survival Skills Rider Training. Set a reminder on your Facebook page when the next show is scheduled, and then you can join me every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. Do take a look at my posts on my Facebook page about my e-course. I'll be putting one of those up again in just a moment, and if you're interested in signing up for that, I'm taking registrations now for the second course that I'll be starting in a few days' time. And last but not least, as you probably guessed, my training is suspended indefinitely. That's hit my income quite significantly, as you can also probably guess. So if you've enjoyed the broadcast, you can help support me by buying me a coffee over on my support page at coffee.com survival skills, and I'll give you the URL for that in a moment in the comments. So, all right, thanks very much indeed for stopping by today. Monday the 30th of March. We'll be back or joining each other for a chat again on Wednesday at 11, and hopefully I'll see you then. Right, thank you very much indeed for your time, and I'll be signing off now. All right, bye for now, everybody.